Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming to the Science Cafe. For those of you who were here for the last edition of this Science Cafe, we had an overwhelming number of attendees and an overwhelming number of questions. I think we had about 70 questions that were unanswered by the end of the session, which is what prompted us to have a follow-up session today. For those of you who are not familiar with what the Science Cafe is, this is an initiative from the Bangalore Life Science Cluster. It is an outreach initiative, and it is a way of taking science to society. The science cafes are supposed to be informal platforms for people to connect with scientists, researchers, and learn more about the science that's happening on the cluster. At the cluster, beg your pardon. It's also supposed to be very different from your regular seminars and academic meetings and so on. The whole point of the Science Cafe is for it to kickstart a dialogue and a conversation between scientists and non-scientists. We we don't want this to be a one-way monologue. We don't want it to just be Axel and Rajani speaking. We want you to get involved. So be disruptive. Please feel free to interrupt whenever you have a question or a clarification. And please treat this like your own living room, you know? So sit back and just get yourself a cup of coffee and just get involved, right? So we're all in this room together, and we're just having a casual evening with Axel and Rajani, and that's how we're going to take it. So with that being said, I present to you Axel. Axel, thanks so much for coming back to do this with us. Really appreciate it. Rajani, also to you. I really appreciate you guys taking out the time, and I will not waste any more of everybody else's time, and I will let you take this away.
Thank you, Mahin, and thank you, BLiSC. And thank you to all of you who've returned to join us on this conversation on honeybees, and also to anyone who's come join here for the first time. And before we start, I'll just do a little recap to just help us remember what we were talking about last week, and then I will continue with some of the questions that I have for Axel. And he will be also sharing some lab work that will demonstrate what bees are actually capable of. And then we'll take on more questions that you all have. Last week we talked to Axel on a lot of topics, mainly fascinating facts on bees and also urban bees. And today we're going to expand a little bit on some of these topics. So at some points it may seem like a repeat, but it will be a good recap as well. So actually, when we talk about fascinating things about bees, we have to talk about how bees communicate about food sources. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, they didn't know that you. What? Am I audible? Okay, yeah. Didn't know that you. What? I'm
yes,
audible.
You are audible.
Okay, sorry. Didn't know that you start with that question.
Okay.
So. Okay, good. So, honeybees have a lot of different. Okay, now, okay. Sorry, this is live, yeah. Okay, sorry about that phone. Okay, so honeybees have, of course, many different ways to communicate. They communicate with odors. They communicate by mechanical behaviors, and you are alluding to the dance language, which is a most complicated communication at least within invertebrates. And honeybees have the capability, so a returning forager that comes back from a flower produces what people call a dance. And it's a movement pattern in which he does a straight walk and then returns in a half circle, does the walk at the same again, and does another half circle to the left. And this kind of like figure eight like a walking pattern is the dance, but the important part is the straight path. And the straight path communicates distance and direction to the food source. And the duration of the path is correlated with the distance, and the angle with respect to the vertical is giving the angle, is the direction to the food source with respect to the sun. And some people call it symbolic language, and it is the only one so far identified in vertebrates. And that is why it's so famous. And the German Austrian Karl von Frisch got a Nobel Prize for identifying it. And what do you want to know more about it?
Yeah, so no, so just in relation to this question, is it only regarding food sources that they communicate, or do they communicate on other things as well?
Yeah, so they use it for
like dangers or something like that. Like
no, so so they use it to communicate locations of food sources, of nest sites when they are searching for new nest sites, and they also use it for finding water. Water they don't use as food. So it's not a signal of danger, but how to say, if the forager experience danger at the food source, then it will not dance. So it will not recruit others to that source. And so the motivation to dance is getting reduced. Yeah, so they don't direct bees to sources where they found danger.
Okay, okay. And another thing that I've read is that unlike humans, honeybees, they kind of count, I think, time in the sense of daylight hours, like not the ambient temperature, right? And so this is what I've read somewhere, that the internal temperature of a beehive, it can be maintained at, it is maintained at about 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the year, no matter what the temperature is. And this kind of protects the, I guess, the queen bee and the larva. So how do they, how are they able to maintain this sort of temperature? How are they able to keep it constant throughout?
So keeping the temperature is particularly in the brood area, particularly for the growing of the brood. Not so much, has nothing to do with the queen. So, and honeybees can produce heat by shivering of their muscles, right? Similar when we are shivering in the cold, kind of the muscles are producing heat. And they do this with the muscles that are actually connected to the wings, but they have a mechanical, they can unplug the wings from the muscles. And so they are kind of producing heat. In countries like India, they might have to reduce the temperature, right? In the open nesting species, they might kind of face a problem that the colony is exposed to the sun and the colony is overheating, and they use water for cooling down. And so basically, they collect water, and then they have the water on their tongues, and they are flapping their wings, and then kind of cold kind of is generated by the evaporation of water. And let me kind of point this out, because I was involved in the study testing why do they do that, and it is probably so so developmental processes, biological processes are depending on temperature, and actually, so keeping a high temperature allows them that the pupae can develop faster. Yeah, so you can actually, so how to say, you can reduce the developmental time of to become an adult. Yeah, so that is actually an intensification of brood rearing.
Wow, okay, interesting. And so the other thing which I want to ask you is that we've heard of the phrase busy as a bee, right? So my question is, are they really busy? Do they sleep at all? What's their day like?
Okay, good. So first of all, they are not busy. I mean, they are, so the colony is busy, but the individual, there's a huge variation in the activity of individual bees. And thanks also, one of my students worked on it. So foragers that are going to a food source, to the same food source, these foragers are working in different intensities. And actually, when you have a group of 10 foragers, then there might be 2 or 3 that are really working hard, and kind of like then in middle group, and then a lazy group. And that might have kind of like also kind of evolutionary reasons. So, and then of course, honeybees sleep. I mean, so kind of for all the ones kind of that don't know, they sleep. And
do they sleep with their eyes open, or it's like?
Yeah, the eyes are okay. So that's a good question. So how to say? So insects don't have eyelids, right? So they cannot close their eyes. But how to say, the brain, of course, could be able to reduce the sensitivity of the eyes, and then and then maybe they are then kind of less, they get less sensitive to light. And that is actually a different, so to say. So if we are talking about sleep, I mean, we are not in science, we are not talking about what humans kind of experience as sleep, right? So and we have specific definitions, and one definition is that sleep is characterized from just being motionless, that you cannot, so the threshold of stimulation is reduced. Yeah, so if you're motionless and then you kind of pump the bee, then it will immediately move. In a sleeping bee, it will kind of like take some time until she responds. This has been actually, this has been kind of identified, I think, 20 or 30 years ago, that they can sleep, and maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, someone kind of restarted that research.
Okay, so so what you're saying is, so the entire hive would not be restful, right? I mean, there'll be, especially dorsata, let's say.
So the idea is that nurse bees, for example, are working around the day, the whole day, 24 hours. And so they are working 24 hours, taking care of the brood, and they might make some kind of like little moments of rest. Whereas when the adult worker becomes a forager, it gets a strongly day-night rhythm. So they are active during the night, and how to say, foraging with flying is highly energetic, demanding. And so they establish a kind of like activity rest cycle. And then these bees can sleep. And we talked about that before, right? So, and when you asked me whether they can sleep, I said yes, and I even think that they are dreaming. And this is based on experiments where bees were trained kind of in a lab assay. They learned odors during the day, and then the researchers divided the two groups, and one group got the odor when they were sleeping, was stimulated with the odor when they were sleeping, and then the next day, these bees that kind of perceived the odor during the night had a higher learning response than those ones that didn't get the odor in the night. What does it have to do with dreaming is that some people think, I mean, at least as I know, think that, for example, sleep is important for memory consolidation. And so kind of like testing them with an odor, presenting them with an odor during the night increased that memory and affected that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so now I want to come to our human interaction with bees, right? I feel that we've always, it's kind of one-sided. It's, human history is very exploitative, if I may use the term, towards bees. We of course in our history we talk about the human bee interaction and how it was, and it sounds all very poetic and everything, but I think it is one-sided. I mean, we've kind of always used them for what they can provide to us. So what's your thoughts on that? Would you want to share anything on this link between humans and bees?
So to say, I'm a communist. So one has to always kind of keep in mind whether exploitation was there always through human history, or whether we saw it with capitalism. I mean, to make that point here. So the importance of honeybees for the human, right, goes back to that honey is one of the few products that has the highest sugar content. So humans have a sweet taste. Yeah. So in that sense, honeybees were in how to say so. And honeybees are in that sense also one of the few insects that are beneficial for the human, right? So and you want, I can kind of show some paintings. Let me kind of, wait a minute. So, so here you can see two rock paintings. One from Europe and one from India, and that go back to about 8,000 to 6,000 to 8,000 years before BC. And so that even kind of prehistoric times, and how to say, if these humans kind of painted or made paintings, that means that that the bees meant something to them. And here it's interesting. You see basically honey hunting. In the left picture, you see in Europe, they have Apis mellifera, and Apis mellifera nests in a cavity. So actually what's depicted is a tree and a hollow and the entrance of the nest. And to the right, you see, and that is obviously kind of like a dosata tree, where kind of people are kind of harvesting honey from dosata colonies. And how to say, honey hunting today is basically the same. And you stopped me, but and then let me kind of like what I wanted to pronounce is or state is that beekeeping, right? Beekeeping then kind of started when actually the humans kind of settled, and there was a huge beekeeping industry in ancient Egypt, and they kind of, and you see that in the scripts. You can see here where kind of like honey is kind of filled in containers. The interesting thing is that old Egyptians used honey also for conserving the mummies, and there was probably a huge trade of honey colonies. And the other one is a script from the Mayas in the Middle Americas, in Mexico, in Yucatan. And this script describes how to harvest honey, and now comes it from stingless bees. And that are not honeybees, it's stingless bees, and they don't have a sting. And they are depicted here as a bee, clearly as a bee, but then with two teeth. And so these stingless bees, as a defense behavior, they bite. And of course, we have them also in India, stingless bees. And they produce honey. I have to admit that I haven't kind of eaten stingless bee honey.
Neither have I.
Yeah. So
it's supposed to have Ayurvedic properties. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is that because then kind of with beekeeping, there comes a whole kind of like, you could have a history of what's the word, of beekeeping, and then you have really regional differences in what people used for keeping. It's always, beekeeping is always with cavity nesting bees, kind of how kind of like what kind of like containers they build to keep the bees, and what kind of material they use, and so that is historically, culturally kind of interesting.
Yeah. So it's interesting because in India we have two variations of this, right? So we have the beekeeping. Beekeeping has been around for a while, But we also are experts at honey hunting. We have in many tribal areas, there is a tradition of removing. This is mainly in connection with dorsata bees. And so now, like back to the cut to the present, and in this day and age, we are reading a lot of articles about how there's a global decline in bee population all over the world. And when I go for filming, I have farmers who tell me that, or they show, like there's this tree that, we used to have like 10 or 12 years back, we used to have like 25, 30 beehives coming, and then each year they'll talk about how anecdotally that how the numbers of bees have, the bees coming in has reduced, and sometimes the bees skip a year altogether. So I don't know if data supports this in India, but anecdotally speaking, it is the decline has been recorded verbally, right? So according to you, what is causing this decline?
Yeah, I mean, because so it started, all this whole topic about declining of honeybees and bees, it started in 2007 when there was a dramatic decline in bee colonies in the US. And with that, the whole discussion started. And at the beginning, it was only talked about this Western honeybee. And then came researcher up and they said, okay, there are also the wild bees. And then they also found a decline in the wild bees. And I think now, actually, it's probably best to talk about decline in insects. And I'm making this point here because there are a lot of insects in the soil and that have also an effect on the plants and are necessary for the ecosystem. Yeah? There are, how to say it, I think that everyone might have own observations, and that is maybe also where it starts, right? So me coming, so if I remember my childhood in Germany, when we were driving with a car in the summer, then the windshield was kind of totally messed up with kind of bees that you kind of caught during car driving. And when you do this these years, you don't catch any bees, or kind of don't catch any insects. And unfortunately, there are only very few data, even in the Western world, about where people, so how to say, what you have to do is you have to have long-term counting, right? Then you can only see whether there's a decline or not. And actually also worldwide, there are only a few long-term monitoring studies. I mean, and these researchers that had this idea are now the heroes, right? And for India, there's nothing. Yeah, there is. Okay, I have to say that I know from one study, Siddhartha Sethi from Atri, who observed dorsata colonies in one area in the Western Ghats. He found a decline. I don't know whether, how to say, so what you have to have is a long-term memory, and then you have to kind of figure out why is there the decline. And it might have different reasons. So that comes now to the reasons, right? You asked me about the reasons of the decline.
Yeah.
So the one big thing is industrial agriculture, right? And industrial agriculture means actually agriculture by monocultures, right? So, and like in the US where you have, where the people, almond, where they kind of plant almond trees. And this is a monoculture. This is an almond desert. And if you do this, because this is not biologically, you can only keep this plantation by using pesticides, right? So then it's pesticides. And if you go for other agriculture, it is also fertilizer. Fertilizer doesn't kind of like necessarily have a role, play a role with honeybees, but with soil insects. Yeah. So
also, I think in monocultures you don't have the other herbs and plants growing, the wild ones, which the bees can forage on during off seasons, I suppose.
yeah. So how to say? So if you if you have monoculture, then basically what you get is that the insects have a mononutrition. And we know that from honey colonies that they are healthier if they kind of collect food from different sources. That is because pollen is not like pollen, and they are differing in the chemical components, right? In amino acids that are often very important for nutrition. Then comes urbanization, and how to say, I think, so I thought about it. You have to a little bit envision urbanization in the Western world and in Japan, right? Where it means actually pouring concrete over all the land. Yeah. So this, I think this is not yet happening in India. Yeah. So if you kind of, so if you go to Japan or to Germany, kind of like cities, you always kind of have to look out for the green. Yeah. So it is kind of closing up the ground. In addition to destroying maybe natural habitats. Yeah. And then they are also talking about, I mean, Europe is full of roads, traffic roads. So, and urbanization and traffic roads also have an effect on the bigger animals, right? So because you are separating habitats. And then fourth, it's certainly environmental pollution, right? And this is undoubtedly a topic in India with the pollution. Yeah. And then at last maybe climate change. So yeah, and how to say, so the
pesticides as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I said at the beginning, you know, the industrial monoculture can only be killed by pesticides, right?
Right.
And pesticides, it's a big problem. So because they are spraying it on kind of like the fields, and you never know how far it's drifting by wind and something like that. Yeah.
Right.
And how to say, so that's also interesting. I recently checked it, so what's happening in Europe. So it could be that big industrial farmers might have very kind of like restricted usage of pesticides. It is in Europe that actually the small gardeners, right, that they are using pesticides uncontrolled. So in a little bit in the idea of, okay, now I bought this bottle of pesticides, it cost me so and so much, so I have to use it. So better I pour it over it. Yeah. So whereas kind of like how to say, if you have a big farmland, you kind of like try to minimize your costs. So you maybe also minimize your pesticides use. Not that is also kind of damaging, but how to say, one has to also look at kind of like the small farmers also, how they use pesticides, and maybe they are not pouring more than they think.
Okay, that's an interesting theory. I never thought about that idea.
Yeah, no, I was also a surprise. This was in a report by scientists, right? Okay. Then the pharma industries, of course, they earn the money by selling it, right? So, so in Europe, there might be kind of stronger legal restrictions regarding the toxicity, right? And what's interesting that the companies, or they say, only study the toxicity for one pesticide, and so there are no studies regarding the interaction of different pesticides.
Right.
And companies cannot do that, because if they would kind of test all the different factors that could affect the toxicity of their product, then the product would be super expensive. Yeah, right. And it could be that even really kind of stronger effects is this interaction of different pesticides.
Right. So actually, a lot of interesting work is happening in India also. Like we met Dr. Sajeev Anand in Kolkata, and he was preparing this app for farmers in India. And I think that was it's sooner it hits the market for people, it will be really beneficial, I think. So now we talked about urban bee issues last time. So I won't really go into that, but there was one aspect about that, which is that the bees coming in at night, dorsata bees, they're coming in at home, into homes at night, right? So I know that that your lab is doing some study on this unique aspect. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Okay. So is it for many people a nuisance that dorsata flies at night? For the researcher, it's interesting because, I mean, we started with talking about the dance language, and I a little bit kind of mentioned that the communication is based on a compass system, and the honeybees, as well as many other insects, use a sun compass. Yeah? So if dorsata is now flying during the night, so how to say, the visual system is so sensitive that it can see something. But now the question is whether it can find the direction of the food source. And because there is no sun in the night. Yeah? So we are now interested in what the honeybees use for a compass system during the night. And there's only one paper on that that's 30 years old. And this colleague showed that they are not using the moon. Yeah. And so we are starting to do that research. And I think there are two possibilities at the moment. One is that they have another compass system using some sky information, or they don't use a compass system when they are flying. That's a non so sexy explanation. But how to say, it could be that they are just flying by orienting, they are navigating by landmarks. The interesting question is that the bees are dancing and during the night, and in the dances they cannot use landmarks, they need to use the compass system. Yeah? So and they do oriented dances, which appears to kind of like that they might use a kind of compass system in the night, but it could also be that they are doing it just out of memory. So and that we have to find out, and that's not easily to find out. So we have to kind of test. So we have to mark the bees individually and then see what they are doing during the day and what they are doing during the night. Okay. We have to do that. We have to do that on the individual animal.
Wow. Okay. So that's a lot of work left, I think, in that, Hannah, in that area. Because, yeah. So the bees that we're talking about right now, the crepuscular bees, these are dorsata bees, right? Dorsata honeybees. So can you tell us about what other kind of honeybees are there in India?
Hi, Rajani, may I interrupt, please?
Yeah.
As is the way of the Science Cafe, we do have some questions lined up.
We are already at 40 minutes.
About 20 minutes to go. So I would like to address some of those questions too. Is that going to be okay?
So that's going to be, that's fine. And if it's kind of related to what we've kind of talked about so far, that'll be nice.
Okay, sure. So I have a whole bunch of questions in the Q&A box, and but I do see a hand up as well. And I want to encourage everybody that's attending to, by all means, yes, ask your question in the Q&A box. But what is really preferable is if you put your hand up and we will let you into the room and you can interact directly with Axel and Rajani. And that's really preferable. I mean, please be as free as you like. This is an extremely democratic platform. So by all means, involve yourself. So the first question we got is from Anushri Krishnamurthy. I'm going to just let her into the room and unmute her. Go ahead, Anushri. What's your question?
Okay, so my question is a little unrelated from what we were talking about, because I want to know what happens if a bee from one hive enters a foreign beehive, and even if it's from the same species.
Yeah.
As in, how do bees recognize their own
I understood the question. So, how to say, it's a little bit like humans. If the worker, if the forager that comes back and kind of goes into a different colony and she has food with her, kind of the probability that they let her in is high. They can, honeybees can differentiate nestmates and non-nestmates, and they do this so the one thing is cuticular hydrocarbons, that's substances that are on the cuticle. And then because of that the foragers bring in different kind of food sources, kind of pollen and nectar from different plants, and they are all smelling, it is that the different colonies smell differently. And the individual forager has kind of like particles on his body that are these odorants. Yeah. So how to say? So they can differentiate between nestmates and non-nestmates, and then it's a second question whether they allow you to come in or not, and that depends on, for example, so if one colony has sufficient food, maybe they don't let you in. So that's depending on the colony state.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah?
Okay, great. Thanks, Anushree. I've got another question here from Harshit Mishra. Harshit, why don't you ask your question?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So again, good evening, everyone. I have again 3 questions, Axel sir. So do bees flourish in wild better or in agricultural fields or urban spaces? That's the first question, because I've seen one talk saying that bees do better in urban areas if we have good number of plants and flowering plants as such.
Yeah, sure.
And the second question is,
go ahead. Second question.
You have spoke about Egyptians using honey for storing the mummies or something like that. So
Yeah.
that's something that made me curious. So if you can please elucidate, that would be very nice. And the third is, I'm a person interested in evolution and phylogenetics. So is there any phylogenetic tree work done on honeybees or bees as such?
Yeah. Okay. Good. Do honeybees flourish in cities, agricultural land, or what was the other one, in the wild? Yeah. So this is totally dependent on flowering plants, and so you can have a situation in a city where there are people have a lot of balconies and with in gardens with a lot of different flowers. So then kind of like honeybees feel nice there. We have recently made a study where we observed different honeybee colonies on the site of the agricultural university in Bangalore. And interestingly, the bees preferred actually areas where there were gardens. But how to say, this is totally depending on whether there are flowering plants or not. Yeah, so it depends on the situation. If you have a huge land of sunflowers, bees love it.
Yeah.
So how to say, honey, so I think that, so honey is highly antibacterial and antimicrobial, because actually sugar is a preferred food source of microbes and bacteria, of many, let's say, not all, but many. So, okay, it's getting dark. It's getting dark because kind of like there's an electrical cut here. So smearing the mummies with honey probably kind of defended, preserve or help preserving it by closing the mummies to bacterial and microorganisms. And then the last question is, is there a phylogeny of honeybees? Yes, and it would have been, I would have shown one. The one that I will show is not the most recent one. I just, a few days ago, I got an email from a researcher in the US who is currently working at a reanalysis of the phylogenetic tree. This is not published, and then that is why I cannot show it. The interesting thing is that if you would have asked me last week, I would have said honeybees originated in Asia. And this seems not to be true. Honeybees originated in Europe, when in Europe it was tropical. And then they migrated to Asia, and then they did irradiation in Asia. And that is why we have the highest number of honeybee species in Asia.
What about the other bees, sir? Like apart from honeybees, like for example, at NCBS we have Krishnamik Kunte sir doing on butterfly families. So is there any similar phylogenetic work or taxonomic work on the other bees?
So how to say? So there's a book by an American passed away, late Charles Michener. He has a book about all the bees. This book has 800 pages. We think that there are about 20,000 bee species. Yeah.
Okay.
And 200 of them are social, and there are about 12 honeybee species.
Okay.
Whether for all the groups of phylogeny are kind of established, I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
So, how do I say? So, coming to that point, taxonomy in India is not very good. I mean, there are some good researchers, but we don't know much about the taxonomy of Indian bees.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay, great. We have some other hands up as well. But let's take a question from the Q&A box, okay? So Rajesh Shah says, hello, Axel and Rajani. I have a few questions. One, how can we survive honeybees from other pollinators? I think what he means, how can we save honeybees from other
Wait a minute. I'm confused because I didn't see you.
Does this make sense? How can we survive from other pollinators?
How can we?
How can we survive honeybees from other wild pollinators?
Not very clear what the question is, though.
Can you write it?
If you look in the chat box, it's in the chat box.
Okay.
How can we survive honeybees from other wild pollinators?
I don't understand the meaning. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm just going to move on to the next question. So Shweta,
let me put it.
Other wild pollinators, maybe.
Let me make one statement. It was, I think, for 2-3 years after the honeybee decline has been reported in the US. And there was a big fuss in the US and in Europe about the decline of the one honeybee species, Apis mellifera. One of the wild bee researchers said, I don't care whether your one species is declining. Look at the wild bees, we have to take care of them. It is, how to say, important to have the diversity. And so there, how to say, so there's also something like this. So if people in the US and the Western world talk about wild bees, they talk about other social bees and mainly solitary bees, right? And we think that they are super important for pollinating different kind of plant species. So how they say, there are differences in the pollination success of different kind of bees. That has something to do with evolution, that specific bees prefer specific plants. Apis mellifera, particularly the man-kept Apis mellifera, is only good, or is kind of like better than everyone else if you have monocultures. Yeah? In India, Apis mellifera would not play a role in pollination because Apis mellifera has never been in India. Kind of pollination in India is depending on the Asian honeybees and the Asian wild bees. So you have to take care of those. Is that kind of a little bit, was that an answer to the question?
Okay, we'll just move on to the next question.
Yeah.
This is from Shweta N. Hegre. Shweta, you're online. Do you want to ask this question yourself? Would you like to ask the question?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. So my question was, how did honeybees transition from being solitary to social colonies? Like, they were solitary at some point of evolution, right? So how did they go? Like, how did that happen?
Oof, oof. I don't know. I don't know. I better say nothing to this because then I'm saying wrong things. So how did, so to say, the idea is that, I hope that not kind of colleagues of mine. The idea is that, so the honeybee colonies actually present a very advanced sociality. And there are other kind of, so there are, for example, bees that can live solitary and can live in groups. And people who want to study what is really kind of like important when you kind of transit from solitary to a group living, to a social organization, they use these bees where you have kind of group, where the bees can switch between that. And then you can kind of see how kind of from solitary to social. What is important is that is taking care of the brood. So that is the only thing I'm saying here. Otherwise, I'm kind of like
so could you like compare the genomes of solitary bees and the social bees, and could you infer something from that if you did something about it?
So that is problematic. There has actually been a study comparing different bee groups, the genomes of different bee groups. And that was actually done in the lab of my previous boss, PI, with whom I studied. And they took just single species from different groups and then tried to compare it, and maybe they came up something that, for example, that olfactory receptor genes are increased in social, in more social bees. But the problem is that if you do that, kind of like how to say, you don't really know whether the difference occurred as represents kind of away from solitary to social, or whether it is specific for the different groups. So there's kind of phylogenetic problems with that. So I think the best is to study these. Also, there are wasps where you have a more less stringent social system. And so I want to say people work on that in different groups and they come up with theories.
Thank you.
I'm just going to ask everyone to please keep your questions short, and Axel, to please keep your answers short, because remember, we have a lot of questions and we always end up not being able to respond to most of them. And the point of the second session was to be able to do that. Okay, so the next person I'm going to invite is a person called Nandita CJ. So Nandita, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Go for it.
Good evening, sir. I'm Nandita. My question is, can bees sense fear, like the fear in animals or humans?
Say this again.
Can bees sense fear, whether it's in animals or in humans?
Whether bees can kind of differentiate animals from humans?
Oh, can
No,
they
can they
sense
sense
fear?
fear?
Can
Fear.
they,
Whether they can sense fear?
yeah.
Yes, sir. That was
Can
my
the
question.
bees sense fear? Yeah.
Okay, good. So if you are running away, the bees follows you. So how to say, that is the way she responds to your fear. Because, how do you say, everyone who is attacking, if it's kind of like a bear or kind of like monkeys that are attacking bees, and if the bees are kind of initiating a defense, they are following, and the monkey or the human will run away. That is what they can perceive. And they prefer if you are dark, so how to say, and then how to say, the alarm pheromone of honeybees has a substance that smells like bananas. So how to say, if you have a banana, then they are also likely to attack you. And uh, so they like your sweat. So if you kind of like produce sweat when you are fearing, they like it because there are minerals in it. So when you kind of like, I know that when you work in the heat with honeybees and you do training with feeder, and you come in, then they are landing on your arms and they are licking the sweat. So I don't think how to say, so, so let's put it this way. No, I'm stopping here because kind of like I was asked to stop. Otherwise, I'm talking 15 minutes.
Yes, but by all means, if you want to continue the conversation and you want to find out more about your question, you can just
So
email
I have
Axel.
one more question. Can
So
poison
Nandita,
stimulate bees, sir?
Nandita, I'm really sorry. Can you please ask Axel this question offline? Because we do have to ask other people as well. So please get in touch
Okay,
with
ma'am.
Axel. You can
Thank you.
email him. And okay,
Yes,
all
ma'am.
right. Thank you
Thank you.
so much. Thanks. Okay, great. So Rajesh Shah has a question as well. The last time I checked, he was online. Rajesh, you're online. Do you want to ask this question yourself? Rajesh, would you like to ask your question? Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next question. So somebody anonymously asked, can poisons stimulate bees, Axel?
And what?
Can poisons stimulate bees?
Oh, I don't know. So I think if a poison has a specific smell and the bees don't like the smell, then they might kind of get aggressive.
Okay, so that's so nice. This is a short and sweet answer, Axel. That's great. That's good. Okay. Okay, we have the next question from S. Tejaswani. I'm allowing you into the room, Tejaswani. You want to ask your question?
Yes. Good evening, sir. I wanted to know if many bees communicate at the same time, many individuals at the same time, and if they do so, how does the colony choose a particular individual?
Okay, good question. So, so how to say? So the question is, so if a colony is foraging at different locations, then there are dances in the colony for different locations. And how does a bee, a forager that wants to go somewhere, kind of decides between two dances that are in different directions? Yeah. So there is, in addition to this abstract information about distance and direction, there is some kind of information in the dances about the attractiveness of the food source. So if the food source is highly attractive, the bees dances longer as well as more lively. So they call it lively. It makes kind of like more movement, so to speak, or kind of like takes a little bit. And then on top of this, bees foragers that are coming from a food source can give a little bit of the nectar to the to the nestmate that is following. And so the nestmate can evaluate the sugar concentration. And in that sense, then followers that have to make a decision between two different food sources would prefer the more profitable one.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you. If I'm allowed, I have a quick follow-up.
Go ahead.
Yes. So how do we measure that intensity when we're doing behavioral analysis? How, as a person, do we
As I
measure
said,
that?
so how to say, there is that the number of turns a bee does, or the number of waggle runs it does, correlates with the sugar concentration. And I think no one has kind of made really a quantitative assessment about the liveliness, although it is that, so the return runs are faster if the concentration is higher.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, the next question, we asked Rajesh for this question earlier. He said his mic isn't working. He's asked us to ask it for him. And his question is, do the pesticides sprinkled affect the bee's DNA?
Did the pesticide?
Do pesticides sprinkled affect the bee's DNA material, or can it manipulate its functions in further generation? And which species is the fittest of honeybees?
What?
Okay, this is a very long question. Let's answer the first part first.
Okay, so the first question. So it, so most, I mean, how to say, at the moment in the Western world, the pesticides that are discussed are so-called neonicotinoids, and they are going actually against an acetylcholine receptor. So basically, they are activating or inhibiting the nervous system, and that makes then the insects die. So there is no effect on the DNA at this level. But it depends on kind of, so how to say, they want to kill them, and kind of like, how to say, to paralyze an insect is maybe the best way. Earlier kind of pesticides were against the hormones, so that insects don't develop into adults. Next question.
The second part of the question is, which species is the fittest of honeybees, which can compete with other pollinators and other wild?
Okay, am I audible? I mean, I couldn't hear you. So
Axel, I'm sorry, there's a storm right now and the connection is unstable. But if Pavitra, can you step in and ask the question, please?
Yeah, I can. Sorry, 1 second.
This is Rajesh's question.
Yeah. I'm just, I was at the top of the list and there are so many.
Okay, no, Axel, it's which species is the fittest of honeybees, which can compete with other pollinators, like other bees or other insects?
okay, that sounds a little bit strange. I mean, okay, I have to reformulate that question for me to give a kind of like a specific answer.
So given the paucity of time, should I ask Rajesh to just get in touch with you directly about this question?
Let's do that.
Okay, so Rajesh, if you're listening, please get in touch with Axel. We'll share his email address and you can write to him. Okay, but I'm going to ask you the next question is, again, it's anonymous. Why do we always see honeybees in colonies? And are they afraid of staying alone like other animals?
Okay, that's a good point. That's a good one. I mean, honestly, so honeybees are social, and as I said, so how to say, they are so advanced social that a single bee could not survive alone. That should be the answer. So how to say, the other one, the psychological thing, I'm not answering.
Okay, I am now going to allow Abhijit Madhusudan to ask his question. Abhijit, what's your question? Abhijit, can you hear us?
Can I want to make a second remark to the question.
Please go ahead.
Can I do this? So half a year ago, there was a publication showing that that there are some. So if you observe a colony and then try to figure out how many interactions an individual worker has, then you find actually some individuals that do not have much interactions with the others. Interestingly, these kind of show higher expression of genes that we also know from humans related to autism behavior. So you can stay separate from the others in the colony. Next question.
Okay, great. So if we still have about 14 unanswered questions here. If there's anybody still in the attendee list who wants to ask a question, I would really suggest you put your hand up and you ask your question yourself. It just saves a lot of time. And you can interact directly with Axel and Rajani. So Prithvinath has a question to ask. Go ahead.
Hello, Axel. I have a question regarding bees planning their work before they leave the colony. Do they plan them, or how do they learn the dances? Do they learn them from other bees in the colony, or are they born with the memory of the dances?
Cool. So my opinion is that it is an innate behavior and they don't learn it. And we did an observation. No, I don't have the time to explain it. There's no study on it, but it's I'm convinced it is innate. And if there is some learning, then it is minor.
And don't worry, I know that you probably want more explanations for your questions, and you the email address. You can write to Axel and ask him yourself. Okay, I'm going to go straight now to Suchit, who wants to ask you a question, Axel. Go ahead, Suchit.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So my question is, how does a bee remember a direction? Like, does it have an inbuilt compass which it calibrates with respect to the sun? You initially spoke of solar compass. So I'm trying to understand how something like that would work.
Yeah, good question. Insects have so there is a region in the brain where we think there's a sun compass. And interestingly, the structure is a half circle, and thus might kind of be able to, and it's a half circle that looks like a cake, kind of cut into different pieces. And we think that the different pieces kind of represent, or in these different pieces, they represent the different directions. So in that short simplification.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay, and the next question is from Arindam Sarkar. He's got his hand up. Arindam? Ask your question, please.
Hello, can you hear me, Axel?
Yep.
Hi.
Yeah, good evening, Axel. I wanted to ask you, has there been any evidence which supports the fact that washboarding behavior of bees serve to give directions for the nest entrance to the returning foragers?
Ooh. Okay, what is kind of like, what is the behavior of washboarding? I heard that term, but kind of like, actually, I don't remember. So, so what the bees are doing actually, and I think that's not the washboarding, is that so at least in the cavity nesting species, you see that that bees are, and it might be so that bees are positioning themselves with the head in direction to the entrance of the colony, and then they raise their abdomen and they are kind of flapping their wings. And the raise of the abdomen kind of is there to release a pheromone. And with the wings, they are kind of like dispersing the pheromone into the wind. And this is a so-called Nazanov pheromone. And the Nazanov pheromone helps kind of the bees to the
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Axel.
So we have the next question is complex and long question. And he's here right now. I'm going to ask Praveen to ask this question himself. Praveen, can you do that? Can you ask your question, please? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, I think this seems to be a problem. All right. Somebody's asking about the immune system of bees, Axel. Can you share some thoughts on the immune system? It's a pretty vague question, but maybe just some observations.
Let me kind of like, then I can finally can show my picture. Wait a minute. So here you see, so we think about that there are about 10 to 11 or 12 species, and in India we have the red ones are in India. These are kind of 5 indigenous honeybee species, and Apis mellifera, the one that's introduced. And the interesting thing is that Apis laboriosa is only occurring in the Himalayas, and Apis andreniformis is probably mainly here in the northeast region, whereas dorsata, serrana, and florea are everywhere. That's about the honeybees in India.
Is that it?
Yeah, you wanted me to be short.
Actually,
no, wait a minute.
You're making this about me. Okay. Vaishnavi Purushottam has a question. She's asking, if there are too many colonies in the same area, how do bees cope with the presence of competitors nearby? I mean, is there a chance that there will be war?
I'm not sure whether I understood the whole question, but so how to say, Apis dorsata is actually aggregated. So, for example, here in my apartment complex, we have 11 honeybee Apis dorsata colonies. So we don't know whether these colonies are foraging in specific areas, so kind of like that there's a separation of the areas, or whether there's sufficient food that all can kind of grow next to each other, if that was the question. So how to say, because they are kind of migratory, so if there is too much competition or if kind of food food availability is getting low, they just go and seek for a better place.
Okay, great. Prithvinath wants to ask if bees are born with an innate memory of how to communicate by dance. I think he's asked this question, right? Yeah,
so
he's asked it. Okay, so the next question is by Harshit Mishra, who's asking, how true is Einstein's quote, although some say this was not said by Einstein, that if a appeared off the face of the earth, man would only live for 4 years. Is that true?
So was it honeybees or bees? I mean, I'm kind of like, how to say, I'm suspicious about that, right? and if it's honeybees, it's not true. Yeah. So if it's bees, I don't know. And I don't know where Einstein got that, right? I mean, because Einstein said so, we don't need to believe it. But so the point, so there's an interesting point. So how to say, of course, there are also other pollinators, but probably bees are the most important pollinators. Second, all these pollinators are also prey of birds. And actually, so that's also an interesting component. If the decline of insects is not only leading to a loss of insects, it has kind of reverberations, kind of like how to say, then the birds don't have food, right? So how to say, so insects are the most animals, and so and anything in kind of that that's a founding of ecology, that everything is interconnected. And if you lose one part, it has kind of like effects on other parts of the ecology. I mean, I don't, so how to say, forget that sentence, but kind of like the message is we have to keep the pollinators. I don't know where you come up with the 4 years.
Yeah, but it's something that I've heard of as well. I mean, people say that if there are no bees, there's no life, we're all gonna die,
What?
That kind of thing. So I mean, I thought it was pretty. I said I've heard of that as well. That if there are no bees, it's an apocalyptic scenario.
I think the Club of Rome 30 years ago said that 2020 it's over, right? I mean, how to say it? So
it's kind of looking like it's going to get over. I mean, there are lots of things going wrong that's happening in 2020. Not just these, yeah.
Kind of people like to use it, right, to make a drama.
A shocking point. Yeah.
It's a drama, right? But
yeah, and also, I mean, I think that these kind of doomsday scenarios really play out well. That kind of sensationalist news.
But the point is, as a scientist, the point is that he is saying 4 years. And how did he come to these 4 years? And then kind of like he has to come up with a model also, right? I think so. He said it, but it's not science. And because
but there's this other point that that I wanted to make is that wild bees, they also pollinate like not just like agriculture, but wild bees also pollinate about 90% of our wilderness of our forests, right? So these forests are really interlinked to so many other factors like maybe food sources or even climate change, like weather patterns, everything. So it could be in a broader sense that it may make sense.
Yeah. So maybe it's true if you want to kind of make up a doomsday scenario, but so as I said, so if we are really so we have to be aware that there is a problem, right? And it is a severe problem. But then one has to be very kind of specific and precise, kind of like how to say. So as I said, so cities do not need necessarily need to be bad for insects, right? So and it's depending and kind of like so we need that. What was it? We need a lot of studies to understand it.
Cool. Okay, so I've allowed Prithvinath into the room. He has another question. Ask your question, Prithvinath.
Hello, Axel. My question was, is it possible for us to teach behavior in bees? Like we teach them in mice or something. Like we give them a specific reward for completing a task. And then if we withdraw that reward after a while, will they continue to do the task?
You asked me whether one can study that or whether one can do that, or what was it?
If we can impart certain behavior into bees so that we provide them a reward for doing a certain task. And then we continue to do that for a while. And then if we withdraw that reward, will they continue to do that task?
Yeah, okay, good. So that is a little bit this question, whether you can use honeybees for TNT. So I think, so how to say it? So there's no question we can train bees to do something. But so for example, we can do only these training experiments under natural conditions if there is no flowering, if there are no flowering plants. Our feeder would always be less interesting to the bees than the flowers. So how to say, so it's interesting, you cannot do it kind of like, maybe you can train dogs to do something like, right? And with dogs, it's a totally different problematic than with bees. So bees are in that sense different. And I don't think that they would, how to say, they are working in our experiments only as long as we are providing them super sugar, right? Otherwise, I think they are not so much concerned with humans and follow what.
Right, one more follow-up regarding this. What if we stimulate their minds with certain hormones or pheromones artificially? Would they respond to them naturally? I mean, like they do in their natural habitat?
Yeah, I mean, so wait a minute. So as I said, if you're kind of holding a banana in front of a beehive, the bees are coming out and will sting you. So in that sense, you can, of course, if you know the animal, you can kind of initiate specific behaviors.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks for asking that question. We have a couple of other questions. Anurag Chakravarti wants to know, how do bees manage to survive during the winter cold?
Yeah. So in the temperate region, the strongest selection pressure is the winter. Many colonies, kind of small colonies, can die during the winter. So the colony needs a specific size. It means number of workers, so that the workers, and so it needs this number of workers, and it needs food reserves. And the colony is in a swarm, and they are producing heat, similar to what I explained at the beginning, by shaking their muscles. And for that, they need food. And that's the way that if they are kind of in a tree, then they're insulated against the cold. The biggest problem for the bees is the duration of the winter, because I think I said it, so the bees cannot defecate, and so the longer the winter is, microorganisms and pathogens might increase in their digestive tract, and that can lead them to infections. I think that was my answer.
Yeah, super. And Pratima has a question. She's asking, how dangerous are Asian giant hornets to honeybees?
Okay, I don't know. So how to say, everyone is asking me about, so wait a minute. I mean, are these the ones that are in the US? So if it's in the US, I don't care. I know that I don't know how it's so much in India, where colonies are killed or taken over by wasps. I know that from Thailand, and the bees have some defense mechanisms. I have seen a Florea colony that I actually relocated, and I didn't take care. They were, so Apis florea is by the, it's overrun by weaver ants. And the weaver ants are going for the honey and for the larvae. And the troop of weaver ants can kind of make a Florea colony abscond. Yeah, so how to say, but there's prey and predators in but I think it's not a big problem.
We've actually gotten to the end of our questions, which is pretty amazing. And Praveen, I think, is going to ask the question now. So Praveen, go ahead. Can you ask the question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah, hello, sir. I have a following question with respect to the developmental time with respect to temperature exposure, which you mentioned earlier. So, does that mean honeybees found on various parts of the planet have different developmental rate with respect to time, as the temperature greatly varies across the planet?
Okay, I had a problem to get the question because of the contact.
Should I repeat it?
Yeah. Repeat it. Maybe someone understood it. Repeat it.
Okay, I have a following question with respect to your statement which you made earlier, which was developmental time with respect to the temperature exposure. So as you said, higher heat or temperature increases development rate. So does that mean honeybees found on various parts of planet have different developmental rate with respect to time, as the temperature greatly varies across the planet?
Okay, good. I think I got what you were asking. So again, so honeybees are social. They have a nest. They create their own environment in which they kind of bring up their brood. They kind of like, so it's hard to say, so they actively temperate the brood. And what we have found is that if we are kind of like experimentally kind of changing the temperature, then it has strong effects. It kind of like even kind of small changes. So how to say, so the adults have evolved the behavior to warm the brood, and the brood actually is kind of like adapted to this specific temperature range. If the temperature range is changed, they die. So in solitary insects, it's totally different, because what you said is, of course, the temperature has an effect on the development. And solitary species are kind of like, if it's too cold, they can get into a resting phase and they don't do a development. And if it's getting warmer, they start to develop, to continue the development. So there are specific phases where the development can be stopped. If it's a solitary insect, that is totally depending on the, environmental temperature. So how to say, so, and there you can see variations with respect to the different environments. In that sense, you're correct. But that has nothing to do with honeybees, because the honeybees build their own environment.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. I'm
We've
always happy.
actually managed to cover all the questions today, Axel, which is fantastic. So Rajni, if you have anything else you want to continue talking to Axel about, then we have about 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Okay, so then we'll, I wanted to show, this morning, one of my friends from Kolkata had shared a video that she had made, which shows like a diversity of the bees in India. I wanted to kind of play that, but if Axel wants to talk about the lab work, which I know he was planning to, then we can kind of just skip to that.
I cannot do that in 3 minutes. Right?
Oh, okay. So, Mahin, so yeah, do you want to?
Play the video?
We can play the video. I mean, everybody can watch that. It's very nice video that she has made, and
Sure,
she's actually a student of Dr. Parthiv Basu, who's done a lot of work on the effects of pesticides on bees, and we can Chandrakant can play that video.
Okay, Chandra, can you play the video for us? Yep.
Yes.
That was a really nice video. It shows the kind of diversity we have, when we talk about bees in India. So that's basically it from my end. I mean, Mahin, you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do have to kind of wrap up. It's been an hour and a half. I just want to say thank you once again, Rajani, for making time to come
Thank you
again on this session, and Axel for being so incredibly patient and answering all these questions, and for putting up with me when I tell you to keep it short. And thanks so much for all of that. This has been a great science cafe. It's been so successful, and it's thanks to the both of you. And for everybody else, please keep in touch with us. Drop us your email in case you want to be notified of future science cafes. We have one coming up next month as well. So please stay in touch. I have dropped in Axel's email address in the chat box. So please email him with whatever questions you have. And once again, thank you so much for coming to Science Cafe. Yeah, Axel, you want to say something?
Just maybe mention that when you send me an email that you listen to this chat, I'm getting a lot of emails and some I'm not looking. So
what should we do?
Put in the chat, then I will answer.
Okay, so just you can start your email bomb or something like that, right? Like emergency. I'm kidding, Axel. You can laugh. It's a joke. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. And we're signing off now from BLiSC. Good night.